study,
and play come together on a Windows 11 PC.
And for a limited time, college students get
The best of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney+.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're gonna crack this case and prove we're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
You are...
Gary the Snake.
And your last name?
The Snake.
Dream team.
And new habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home.
You're clearly working it.
Zootopia 2, now available on Disney Plus, rated PG.
Morning decisions. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
The primary duty of any government is the security of our people. You can define security in many, many respects, but at least one respect, it is making sure that we are physically protected from any aggressor and that we pull our weight with our friends in NATO.
Drink? Now, shall we begin?
Hello, a quick bonus episode for my wonderful listeners. In the wake of the British Prime Minister resigning, I got Robert Lyman on to discuss the state of the country's military. Robert is a former officer and now writes history books, and we chat the parlous state of our nation's defences. I hope you enjoy, and if you have any comments, go ahead and let me know.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Rob. Thanks very much for joining me on this bonus episode of the podcast. And Rob is the author of From Victory to Defeat, which is, I think, not your latest book. Your latest book is on career, but I think in the context of our conversation today, I think it's probably a little bit more relevant, isn't it, Rob?
It's the first book, well, many years ago, 2010, I helped Richard Dannett, Lord Dannett, write his autobiography. And a few years passed, and he then gave me a call and said, let's we share agents as well, and we had been having a conversation over a couple of years about the state of the British Army and where it all came from. And I had long wanted to write a book about command in the British Army in the Second World War. He'd wanted to talk about how Britain had failed in 1940. So the two things came together, and we wrote this book in 2019-20 through COVID, and was published, I think, in 2021. Comparing the success of the British Army in 1918 with its dramatic failure in 1940.
Well, it's relevant for us today because actually Rob and I are speaking, I think, within minutes of Keir Starmer, our glorious leader, having fallen on his sword and resigning, putting himself out of his misery.
Everyone's misery, frankly.
Everyone's misery.
I think he's the most unpopular Prime Minister on record, which is surprising given the Prime Ministers we've had in the recent past. But the reason why we're talking today is because one of the factors that has caused his downfall this week is the resignation of his Defence Secretary and one of the junior ministers over the Defence Investment Plan, which was the document, I guess the funding document coming out of the Strategic Defence Review, which took place a year ago. And what I wanted to do was to speak to you, Rob, about this, because it seems to me as though in this Defence Investment Plan, the resignation was over an increase of spending, which, as far as I could tell, was 0.08% increase in defence spending. And actually, when one looks at the actually shocking state of the Ministry of Defence, the wastage of
finances there means that really we're looking at a cut in defence spending. So I wanted to ask you, Rob, this is a situation that's suboptimal.
Yeah.
And I wondered what position we are in with your hat of the interwar period, where I don't know, I guess first question, are we in a worse state now than we were then? Bearing in mind, we can't possibly predict what's round the corner, and they didn't know that the rise of the Nazis. But are we in a similar or worse state than that period?
Well, a couple of things. Just as we start, the DIP, the Defence Investment Plan, was a political artifice. Actually, it was the SDR was published last year, 2025, June 2025, and the idea was that money when you produce a plan like this. The assumption is it's written and presented and published with the agreement of the cabinet. It was quite clear that very shortly before it was published, an announcement said that this would only be advisory, which meant that actually cabinet didn't agree with it, and it wasn't going to be government policy. As soon as it was published, government said they endorsed every part of it, which is actually a lie, because you can only fully endorse something if the money then flows. What would happen in normal events, because we've had a number of these before, certainly in my long career, we've had 3 or 4 of them, the Treasury agreement would have been stitched up in advance, and there would have been a line to take in respect to the money. That did not happen. So SDR was published. It was written by 3 independents, 3 independent people, including Sir Richard Barrons.
And George Robertson, the very well respected.
Yes, George, absolutely right. And actually, I think it's a good.
And Fiona Hill as well, actually. 3 big brains.
Yes, big brains. The problem is that the money did not flow, or was not up to it. And then a separate conversation started to happen with the Treasury. And when people like me started pressing the government to say, when is this going to be funded? Initially, the line from government was, it's fully funded. It's fully funded. The Prime Minister actually said on one occasion, this is fully funded. But it was quite clear that unless you actually had a full articulation of what money was involved, that was a lie. And this is one of the reasons why he had to fall on his sword, because he has not been able to trust the people who've given information. I mean, some of the own goals in government over the last year and a half have been quite incredible. Anyway, the point is, government then came back to us towards the end of last year, September, October, saying we're going to have a defence investment plan, because there are there was a national defence strategy published at the end of the year, and we all said, hurrah, this is going to actually put meat on the bones of SDR. And it was then very apparent to everyone looking at this very closely that there was no agreement to fund SDR. Now, what's even worse, Ollie, is that there is no agreement to fund current programs in the MOD. Now, this is partly a consequence of the ongoing battles between the MOD and the Treasury. These aren't new. These happen every day. The Treasury does not want to spend any more than it needs to in the MOD. Why is that? Well, partly because the welfare budget is uncapped. I'm not sure whether many people know that, but if you are in need of welfare payments, you'll get it regardless. There is no cap. There is a cap, of course, on other departments, and there's definitely a cap on the MOD. And in order to pay for uncapped welfare spending through the DWP, money has to be taken from elsewhere. That is a reality of the budgetary system in our government. It in my view, it's completely barking mad, but that's not the point of today's conversation. So the reality is, what the announcement of the publication of the DIP meant.
And just sorry to interrupt you, but on welfare, I believe certainly my newspaper was telling me at the weekend, I think it was Neil Lawson actually, that the welfare budget exceeds our income tax receipts.
Yes, it does. It for the first time last year, it exceeded something like £333 billion a year. So we're now overspending in terms of we get money revenue from other sources, of course, but income tax specifically, we're now spending more. You remember, you're old enough to remember Margaret Thatcher's famous, I certainly do. I remember watching this when I was doing my economics A-level. She said, in economics, government economics is no different to a housewife managing her family budget. She can't spend any more than she receives, so she allocates money according to domestic priorities. And I thought, well, that makes sense. And of course, that's long been broken. Anyway, I've got to come back to your point. The problem is, over the last few months, the dip has been, everyone has recognized the dip is an excuse for a battle that's going on between, in government, between the MOD and others and the Treasury to fund the SDR. And the result of that was very clear. Very clearly, the resignations, two resignations a fortnight ago. Now, you asked the question, Ollie, whether we're in a worse state than the 1930s. Well, I'm going to say yes and no. Okay, I'm going to say we are in a far worse state than we were in 1935 and 1936, without a shadow of a doubt. In 1936, but before I clarify, but we are in an equal state as perhaps to where we were in 1938 or 1939. And the reason I say that is, look, the world is very different now. We are not threatened directly by a large continental power threatening to invade us. That was Germany in the late 1930s. But we are threatened, we in Europe are threatened by a rampant, out of control, frankly, superpower in Europe, charging around at and mounting intensive war against one of our neighbors, Ukraine, and also egregiously presenting a challenge to all those fundamental principles of statehood, not nationhood, but statehood that we hold dear, not least of all the inviolability of sovereignty. So if you have sovereign borders, they're inviolable. You cannot inviolate, you cannot invade them, except for a number of very clear reasons. And we don't need to get into those reasons now, but if you think about the arguments for the Iraq War, these reasons were all, very, very important in the development of the arguments of do we invade, do we not. Now 1935, we had Stanley Baldwin was prime minister, of course, and
a great man.
Yes, partly a great man. I know you're a great fan of Stanley Baldwin, but he wasn't perfect. But Neville Chamberlain was his chancellor, and there was a recognition that we, the country, needed to reinvest in defence after a very, very long period of non-investment in defence, a dramatic curtailing after the First World War. Quite rightly, you can't live on a war economy all the time with 50% of GDP spent on defence. It's just not possible. But what you absolutely need to do is accept a number of principles associated with public policy in defence. The first and most important principle is that unless you invest in preventing wars, you're going to pay when war does come. And the only way you're going to succeed if you don't invest during peacetime for war, and war does come, you've got to really you've got to be bloody lucky, frankly, to get away with it. Because when war does come, you need the money, you need time, you need friends, you need space to be able to put yourself onto a war footing. And that ratchet is something that, to be fair to Neville Chamberlain, he recognized 1935, 2 years into the takeover of Germany by the Nazi Party, that they were set on war. There was no expectation they were going to invade us, but they were certainly going to invade their neighbors because they rejected the Versailles dismemberment of Germany, handing over territory to Poland and Czechoslovakia and so on. Okay. The real problem, there are lots and lots of problems with the rearmament that took place in 1935, which we can talk about. But actually, at the time, we still had the Royal Navy. It was the largest and most powerful navy in the world, bar none. I mean, it was quite remarkable. So we were secure on the seas. We could blockade Germany as we did in the First World War. We had a strong army. Although the army was dispersed across the world guarding our garrisons, and the army was designed to protect foreign garrisons, it wasn't designed to manage continental war. And this is a fundamental difference. It was very much a 1914 army. It had gone back to where the comfortable soldiering that your great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather and mine all enjoyed on the edges and fringes of empire, making sure the Union flag flew unimpeded. Um, so that was where we were. Now we have possibly 5 frigates that could deploy to protect our international maritime interests. I think
this is key, Rob. I sorry to dive in there, but I think the naval element, I'm very persuaded by Andrew Lambert, who of course would put forward the case that we are a maritime power.
Well, we are. I mean, there are facts involved here. We are a maritime power.
But are we? We've got 5 frigates, and one of which was progressing to Cyprus like an asthmatic ant.
Well, let me just, I'm going to change we're not a maritime power, but we ought to be, because, I can't, I'm not going to go into facts and figures here. The reality is the bulk of what we consume in this country is imported one way or another. Now we do make a lot.
40% of our food, I think, is imported.
Yes, we still make a lot of stuff in this country, but of course, it's not all for domestic consumption. We export it as well, and of course, if you export, that's where our revenues come from. And if we don't export, then our revenues go down and make us poorer. So it's really important. Waterways need to be protected. I think one of the fundamental problems with us is that we have, over the last 25 years as a country, we have been numbed into believing that the world is becoming a much more pacific place because of the networks of alliances and agreements and collective treaties that we have. And we've put our trust and our faith in them rather than in hard power. There's always been a tension in British politics, British foreign policy, around this idea between hard and soft power. And we have, the reality, Ollie, is that hard power is expensive. You need lots of ships and aircraft and deployable armies, and that costs the taxpayer money. And particularly, governments don't like to spend money on defense. This is not a left or a right thing. Conservative governments have been worse at this than Labour governments. We've got a real
Yes,
problem.
I think GDP, defense spending as a percentage of GDP in 2018 hit 1.8%.
Yeah, well, yes, but you need to reduce that. But because until 2010, the GDP figures did not include our CASD, the continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent. So that money was separately paid for and allocated to the Cabinet Office budget. It did not include, until 2010, the cost of service pensions. It's now included. And I think that there are specific figures which actually bring down the GDP, our GDP spending on defense to about 1.47%, something like that. So it's
they've also included, I think, a broadband rollout in the defense?
Yes, so basically includes all the infrastructure costs of defense, everything. It also includes all the costs, the infrastructure costs, and a lot of the government doesn't actually declare it, of course, for our secret services, so GCHQ and so on. It's not included in the Foreign Office budget. It's regarded as a security element included in defense, and that's basically an internal fudge. And it's an internal fudge because NATO allows that to happen. NATO determines what is allowed to be in and what isn't. Now, I mean, you've just touched on a reality that we have been underspending on defense since certainly 1990. And I think the big debate is, how much money do we need to spend on defense? And I think what people are suddenly waking up to realize now in 2026, that we are naked. We have we've allowed ourselves to be boiled like a frog. And over the last 25 years, you wake up. I'm mixing analogies here or metaphors. It's not working well, is it? But you wake up in the morning, you realize you've got 5 deployable frigates. You've got 13 warships and a navy that can't do everything we wanted. We have an army that cannot fight a high intensity campaign anymore because we don't have any artillery. Now we've got rid of the artillery for good reasons. We've given our wonderful AS-90 self-propelled 155mm howitzers to to Ukraine, and that's a good thing. But we haven't done anything to replace them. Well,
We
we've
could
ordered
deploy,
some.
I think, one brigade, and
Well, so let's just talk about this. And also at the same time, we've reduced the number of our fighter squadrons from 36. When I was around in the Ministry of Defence 20 years ago, we had 36 fighter squadrons. We've now got 6. We have absolutely reduced our military capabilities to near zero, I would say. I mean, there is a point at which there is no point in having a a military capability because you can't do anything with it. So let's just look at the army. The big existential question about the army is, what is it for? What does the United Kingdom need an army for? And the argument still runs that we do not need an army. Oh, sorry, I'll make it very blunt. We either have an army that looks after the security of the United Kingdom, operates within our boundaries, and might do something, if required, to look after our foreign territories like the Falklands and Gibraltar and so on, if required. So it needs to be expeditionary, but it doesn't need to be large. Or we have an army that joins our allies in NATO to protect Europe should the Russians or some other bad guy come charging across to threaten us. And that requires what strategists used to call in the 1930s a continental commitment, an army that is created to fight a war in Europe. Now, the last time until 1914, the century before, we did not have a continental commitment. The last time we as a country committed an army in Europe was 1815. You all remember Waterloo. We then had 99 years where we did not get involved in continental wars, despite there being quite a few of them. But we determined in 1914 to do so. So we then created another continental army that over 4 years became quite an extraordinarily powerful army. In fact, by 1918, the British Army was the premier army in Europe, and it defeated the Germans, Ludendorff's army, in 1918, and those great battles, the 100 Days battles, that ended the First World War. And there's a huge series of myths around how the First World War ended, and most people forget the fact that actually the German armies were defeated in the field quite outstandingly. And we can come back to the
100-day campaign.
The 100-day campaign. I mean,
by the British Army, not
by the British Army. Now, well, the Empire Army as well, because there are lots of Canadians and Australians involved. And I have to say that many of the brilliant ideas, particularly in the Fourth Army under Rawlinson, came from the Australians. Monash's incredible battle in Le Hamel involved dropping ammunition to forward troops by aircraft in 1918. Really quite revolutionary. Anyway, so we have a situation where we created a continental army in 1914, and it was very successful and defeated the Germans. We were forced again to create a continental army. Despite lots of reluctance in the 1930s, we were forced to create a continental army in 1913 to send to France. And we're in the same position now. Now, it's slightly different in the sense that we still have obligations to NATO to contribute military capability on land, in the air, and at sea to NATO. But whilst we have paper commitments, we as a country have allowed the reality of those commitments to run into the sand. And the reason, and the way you can see this is, you look at a commitment, you just say, okay, I'm going to be able to provide a division, a warfighting division to NATO, and it's going to have this, and it's going to have tanks and integrated artillery. It's going to have a close air support component. It's going to have infantry, and it's going to have X, Y, and Z, and it's going to have it's going to have combat support and combat service support elements as well. But then you ask the question, well, how long are you funding to sustain that operation? And that's where everything falls off a cliff, because although we can support a warfighting division, assuming we get some artillery soon, that's the third, the Iron Division to NATO, we can't support it for any longer than probably 4 or 5 months. We do not have the artillery in storage. We cannot replenish troops through battle casualty replacements at the level they will be required. And what is that level? Well, we're looking at 20 to 25%, the standard rate of battle casualty replacement a month of battle. Every month, every study of battle, and I've done a few of them, I was doing them in the Ministry of Defense 25 years ago, indicates that you're going to lose 20% of your manpower every month of combat. So what you do is you look at how combat is arrayed over a period of time, and you work out how you're going to replace that manpower. But if you're going to go to war for 6 months, and that's going to include 6 weeks of battle, think about losing 25% of your manpower. How do you get that? And manpower, I'm talking here about trained manpower. These are people who can go into, come from the UK, go into the 3rd Division, fill in the gaps that have been caused by battle casualties, and fight at the same level of expertise and experience and capability as those who are already there. Now, the reality is we do not have that. We are completely empty behind. Not only that, but there are intangible capabilities that we have absolutely lost over the last 20 years. And I'm sorry to say this, but the last time the British Army did a live FTX, a field training exercise with all its kit at brigade level, was 2004. Now, this is absolutely shocking, isn't it? 2004. We have subsequently got rid of...
So that's when, just for the benefit of listeners there, that's when you send your basically your fighting army, presumably somewhere like Canada or West Germany.
Batters in Canada, yeah.
Right, and you see tanks charging across fields,
and you practice
missiles,
everything. You practice the advance to contact. You practice contact, so battle. You practice the withdrawal. You practice defensive operations in your battle group. So a battle group, we're talking about probably 2 regiments of tanks. So a tank's got a tank regiment's got about 56 tanks in it. So you're talking about 110, 12 tanks, an armored infantry battalion, so 600 to 700 men, and all your support. You've got artillery. You've got at least 1 artillery regiment of 155s, engineers, and all the rest of it. So an armored battle group, you're looking at 5,000 to 6,000 men and equipment, and so you've got to practice it all the time.
Presumably, then, in our current army, you're talking a handful of people who've got experience of that.
Well, we're only a handful. The last, yes, a tiny handful. There are one or two. There were one or two around, but it's sorry. I just want to. Shall I name names? And I'm not going to do that.
No. I do. One thing I wanted to ask you really, because and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but the political will, because I think in the 1930s, you're talking the majority of MPs in Parliament would have served in the First World War, or certainly if they didn't, knew someone who did, and probably knew someone who was killed.
Yeah.
Whereas.
You're right.
Well, I think whereas if you look at the House of Commons today, there is a small percentage of people who serve. Now, that's not to say there is a requirement for it, but I think in the peace dividend post 1990, we've seen a complete decline, and I'm as guilty as anyone in this. I never served, but there is a huge decline in the number of people who have a connection with the army, and with that, I think we've lost the political awareness of how important having a hard power is. So much so that I suspect there is a large cohort of MPs in the current government who think this is all unnecessary. Britain is not this nation anymore, and we should forget about it and look to spend all our money on other things like welfare and like public services.
You are 100% right. So we do have, and Mark Urban, friend of mine, has produced a really good Substack in the last couple of weeks on this particular problem, where he said actually, our society as a whole doesn't think about defence from day to day. There are mad people like me who do it all the time because, we're driven by it, and we recognise its incredible importance, and we're worried about it. But most people don't give it a moment's thought. I mean, I've got a very good friend in the village where I live, and I mentioned this to him. I think I might mention one of my books. He said, "Rob, you're a bit of a warmonger, aren't you?" And I looked at him thinking, you're a highly intelligent, well-educated professional man, and he doesn't think about defense at any time. It never ever crosses his radar, and he would regard it as quite strange to do so. So there is a real problem. And my response to that particular question, Ollie, is to say it must be the primary duty of any government is the security of our people. You can define security in many, many respects, but at least one respect, it is making sure that we are physically protected from any aggressor, and that we pull our weight with our friends in NATO. And part of that is clearly funding defense, but another part of it is making the argument for defense. So your point is that in the 1930s, there were lots of people around who knew how important it was, but that's not the case anymore. There's very few people who actually understand it. And the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, there are a handful of people who know anything about defence and recognise its importance. But the other thing we need to bear in mind, of course, is that in the 1930s, most people, when rearmament began, were not keen to support rearmament because they didn't want to see war again. So even though people, Parliament was absolutely chock-a-block full of people who had served in the First World War, very few of them saw the need to arm. The predominant pacifist argument in the late 1930s, very, very strong, was that if you arm, it's going to lead you to war, which is quite perverse, isn't it? So there was great antipathy to rearmament in the 1930s, even though people had served. Now people haven't served, and it doesn't even cross their mind. So I think one of the great failures of political leadership in this particular government, certainly with Starmer, his abject failure to make the case for defence. And there's no point having a fight with the Treasury if you know the PLP, so the parliamentary, all the people in all the backbenchers don't support it, and the country's not behind you. If the country doesn't feel existentially exercised by this need, nothing's going to happen. And Starmer certainly didn't have it in him. I'm not sure his predecessor, Rishi Sunak, had it in him. And this is a real challenge for all our politicians. How seriously do you take defence? How seriously do you take our commitment? We still have people in Parliament. I mean, I listened to a Labour backbencher on the news a day or two ago saying, look, we know that Eastern Europe's unstable. We know there's a nasty war going on in Ukraine, but it doesn't impact us. It'll impact us in terms of oil, but not in terms of security. And I'm thinking, how bizarre can that argument be, and how naive can people be? When houses are set fire, you have to be very careful with putting it out. Otherwise, the fire can
spread to the Baltic states, I think, but really are.
I'm very worried about the Baltic states. Yes,
but one thing I did want to mention, which is last question for you before we go, is that the MOD's financing is the way it wastes money in procurement is nothing short of a national disgrace. If you look at France.
It's always been.
Yes, but this is sort of a slight frustration for me because I speak to many former soldiers like yourself who go, "Yes, it's always been the way," but we can't carry on like that. Good. But if you look at France, they have similar defence spending to us, yet do not experience this problem.
The better example is Italy. Italy has the most amazing Navy, Army, and Air Force on a fraction of the money we spend. And I was as a serving officer, I served in Army Staff Duties, which is a department close to the Chief of the General Staff. So we looked after a lot of Army policy. And I would say there are a number of things that are a problem. One is the political military interface. The other is infighting between Army, Navy, and Air Force inside the Ministry of Defence, which is as brutal as it comes. The other is interminable bureaucratic decision making. The other actually is a real problem in getting the army to decide what it wants. Now, I saw this at close hand because for a short period of time I was involved in the MRAV project, multi-role armored vehicle project, which led to Ajax, right at the beginning. And that is this really quite ridiculous fight in the army about getting something we need today versus getting something we need in 40 years' time. And in every case, when you try to determine what we need in 40 years' time, you get a failed project. You get a Nimrod, you get an Ajax.
You can't possibly know what's going to be unless they've got crystal balls, and that's where all the money's going.
Well,
in the MOD.
so it's a very simple problem. I mean, I say it's simple. When you lay out a specification for an armored vehicle, you need to be determining what is achievable now when you put out the spec, or in the very close future, not putting out crazy all singing all dancing specifications. We have an over complexity in specification building in the Ministry of Defence, and it's always been our Achilles heel. We have done it better in the past, and I just think about Challenger 1, which came online in the mid-1980s. It was actually designed for the Shah of Iran, and it was designed by Vickers. When that contract went bust, Challenger 1 was given to the Military Vehicles Engineering Establishment, which is basically the Army's design team for military vehicles. They revamped it for British military use and created the specification from a live vehicle. And it was tremendously successful. Challenger 2 was fundamentally a better tank and a new tank, but it looked similar to Challenger 1. And Challenger 3 is basically an upgraded Challenger 2. But there are ways of doing it, and that's one of them. Take a commercial vehicle, and there are lots of them out there, rather than spending a huge amount. I mean, the whole story about Ajax is a disaster from everyone's perspective, because at the time, a vehicle was available, a very good vehicle was available, produced by BAE in Sweden, and it was rejected because at the time, politically, this is what I mean by the political military interface, BAE had too many contracts. Well, that happens when you reduce the military industrial complex to a couple of providers. It had the best vehicle, and it's now serving across Europe and serving in Ukraine, and is very successful. And we still have not got Ajax.
No, and there's an interesting story on the long and the saga of Ajax, so I should put that in. I'll also put a link into Mark Urban's, but it sort of seems like another one of these national projects, along with Hinkley Point and fish discos and HS2 and bat tunnels that is just a sort of perfect indicator of a failed.
Yes,
I don't want to call this a failed state. That's an exaggeration, but we're failing left, right, and centre.
Well, there are examples actually where we can get it right, and I give you one very quick example, which is the National Emergency Commission appointment of an individual to lead the vaccine rollout in 2020, which was tremendously successful, and that involved knocking people's heads together, giving single authority and responsibility to an individual in a small team with clear ministerial direction, and it worked fantastically, and everyone pulled together. The problem is there are too many competing interests in Britain, not just in the military sphere, but you've mentioned HS2. I mean, we set unachievable and very, very expensive specifications, and then throw lots of money at solving the problem. So we get very little bang for our buck in terms of defense compared to Italy and France, and it's a national disgrace.
Well, that is a call for benign dictatorship, if ever I heard. So,
I'm happy to set my name forward at any time, Ollie. You know that.
Splendid. All right, listeners, there you go. That's a nice bonus episode. I'm putting this out mere less than 2 days after the Prime Minister has resigned, because we're speaking on the Monday the 22nd. This will go out on the Wednesday. So this is pretty as live as I can manage it, actually. And thank you very much for listening. Rob, thank you for coming on. The book, if you're interested in exploring this period between World War I and World War II, is called From Victory to Defeat. Written by Robert Lyman, and also General Dannett. But Rob, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Lovely to speak to you again, Ollie.
We've come to the end of this club meeting, so thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch about club benefits, please do, either by email or on X or Instagram. Links are in the show notes. I've also included my Substack link so members can read articles I've written on various matters that may be of interest. The History Book Club is written and presented by me, Oliver Webb-Carter. Music is by listener Chat DMZ. Episodes continue next week and every week, so please do join, subscribe, and if you can provide the club with a 5-star rating, we would be delighted. In the meantime, I thank you again, and now I have to usher members out into the real world. Until next time.
Have no fear, Chosen Foods is here to defend your favorite foods from the forces of seedy oils and sketchy ingredients. With cooking oils, salad dressings, and mayo, all powered by the good fats from 100% pure avocado oil and simple, delicious ingredients. Chosen Foods.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.